Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Celebrate the fact today that Andrea Leadsom has apparently fallen four square behind Theresa May's Brexit deal. We will, in the course of the morning, be revisiting some of Andrea Leadsom's greatest hits. Oh, hold on to your hats for that. It's Thursday, so we will be indulging in a little bit of deliberate as opposed to accidental light relief. Come 12 noon, Mystery Hour will be upon us. Second hour of the slot of the programme. The second slot is still, in a sense, up for grabs, although I am drawn to the restaurant chain that is seeking to discourage families from consulting their phones at the table. And reading into that story, it was rather charming, actually, because when I saw the headline, I presumed it would be aimed at the children. I think all of us have, perhaps, been a little bit guilty of treating an electronic device like a very, very, very cheap babysitter, even while we're out. But in fact, the more I look at that story, the more I wonder whether it's actually aimed at the parents. How many times have you found yourself perhaps consulting your phone when you should really be concentrating on your child? We hopefully will have a little bit of time to get onto that. But what I really want to do, I think that transformation is the watchword of the calls I enjoy the most. People who've undergone a transformation or a change, or people who, of course, have got a story to tell that is utterly alien to our own experience. But if you've actually done something to try to reduce the tyranny of the smartphone or the tablet in your family, because you must, we have, I'm not going to be holier than thou about this, caught yourself sitting at a table, all four of you, checking your tablet or your phone. I mean, it's quite bizarre. It's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, that we believe on this programme that new doesn't necessarily mean nasty. We're not reactionary, dreaming of some mythical 1950s society that never actually existed. But as I get older, I do find myself, as you know, subscribing increasingly to the school of thought that things must have been better in my day. So we'll have a look at that. There are a few things more modern than that, that development, or that phenomenon. We begin with Brexit because we have to. Some days I'd rather not, as you know, but I think today is one of the days when we have to. It's so predictable, isn't it? Mark Carney, do you remember Mark Carney popping up on the telly the morning after the referendum result came in, when the two men who'd done more than any others to deliver it looked absolutely broken? I will never forget the looks upon the faces of Michael Gove and Boris Johnson as they were compelled, really, to face the cameras to, quote, celebrate, end quote, a victory they never thought would be theirs. I still, and I know that this will upset you, I still lean towards the notion that Gove's motivation was a little more principled, that he does have somewhere inside a vision of the future that he thought would be preferable to the present. But Johnson's decision, as we know, was motivated exclusively and entirely by self-interest. He thought that by opting for leave, a decision he made after writing a column in favour of remaining and leaving and making a decision at the very last moment, he thought that Remain would win, but that his ascent to the top of the Conservative Party and therefore Downing Street would be immeasurably aided by the support of Eurosceptics. So they would be disappointed Eurosceptics who had lost the referendum but would be unable to vote for David Cameron's successor if they had supported Remain. So Johnson was genuinely, well, no, not genuinely, metaphorically, he was trying to have his cake and eat it, and he almost pulled it off. But imagine making a decision to support a campaign that you hoped would lose. If you want to get to the very heart of the hypocrisy that runs through Boris Johnson like Blackpool runs through a stick of rock, then that would be it. I'm gonna throw my weight behind the campaign that I actually want to lose, because in the long run, I don't really care what happens to the country. But I do care passionately about what happens to me. And if I don't get to be Prime Minister, I shall squeam and squeam and squeam until I'm sick. So that's why he did what he did. So it was to Mark Carney, of course, that the responsibility fell to stand before the country on that dread morning and actually be a grown-up and explain the epic amounts of money he was going to move in order to head off some of his own predictions. He strikes me as one of the most selfless figures in the whole sorry saga. You'll never see him sort of claiming kudos or credit. He's quite dull, which I think is probably what you want from a central banker. There's no grandstanding or or politicking, despite what some of his detractors might say. But he stood there and actually made decisions, fiscal decisions, quantitative easing, that were designed to make his own analyses not come true. It's quite an incredible thing, that. It's the opposite of politics, isn't it? Banking, central banking, when you have the actual responsibility for the economic welfare of an entire nation at the end of your fingertips. What are you going to do today? Well, I'm going to make decisions that will make my own predictions hopefully not come true. He said, but then all those idiots who shout things like Project Fear are going to claim that you were wrong. Well, no economic forecast can ever be 100% correct. Nobody's infallible, but I can't sit here and deliberately enact policies that will prove me right when I have the power to mitigate against the impacts of the decision that the country has now taken. So Mark Carney's position is, I think it's a really bad decision and it's going to have a really bad impact on Britain, but there's stuff I can do to mitigate that badness. So it's my job to do it. I'm not here to win votes. I'm here to do the best job I can. I may have a slightly rose-tinted view of him. I'm happy to be educated and enlightened. But I don't have a rose-tinted view of Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, the man who believes that women who've been raped shouldn't be able to access terminations because he's such a Christian that he finds food banks uplifting. And yesterday embarked upon a sort of quasi-racist criticism of the governor of the Bank of England. Quite what his Canadianness has to do with anything, I do not know. But he's become the sort of maypole around which all the mad people dance now. And he has sort of cast himself as the sage, the economic sage who's right, while Mark Carney is wrong. And you know, and I know, because I've had the privilege of speaking to more deluded Brexiters on this programme, or misled Brexiters on this programme, than probably anybody else in the British media. And the one abiding theme is that they have heroes. They kind of think that, you know, you could have Donald Trump's gassing children at the moment, but somehow we've allowed ourselves to become a country where people think he's anything other than despicable. Such is the power of right-wing media. But we look at this scenario now and we see people who don't actually have arguments anymore. They just have heroes. So yesterday was a heartbreaking programme, caller after caller after caller, saying things that weren't true, and then getting very cross when I pointed out that they weren't true, and getting even crosser when I proved conclusively that they weren't true. But as we demonstrated with one lad, I think his name was Andy, at the end of seeing all of his arguments utterly disproved, completely disproved, even by his own admission, I said to him, you're still going to go away thinking you're right, aren't you? It was very honest, very moving moment. He said, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Because this is the point, isn't it? You've got somebody, we're quite a deferential nation. So you've got someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg on the telly, or Boris Johnson, or to a lesser extent, I think, David Davis. And we sort of think, well, they went to Eton and Oxford and they're posh. They can't just be talking complete toilet. They are, but they don't realise it themselves, I think, sometimes. So I don't think it's right to get cross with people who just think, well, it can't quite be as ridiculous and as daft as people like Mark Carney say it is, because, you know, we've got Johners and Moggers on our team, and they're stand-up fellas. So in the case of Jacob Rees-Mogg, we should probably remind ourselves at this point that he apparently can't count up to 48. Adamant was he that they had the requisite number of letters to trigger a vote of no confidence in Theresa May, but it turned out that they barely had half that sum. So either he can't count, or he was fibbing, or he himself didn't understand the ebb and flow of support for the Prime Minister. He's unveiled either way as either incompetent or ignorant, which is the big Brexit conundrum, isn't it? Is this incompetence or ignorance? Is this dishonesty or delusion? And that leads me to my question today, which I direct at my friends who are still labouring under the illusion that a man who can't count up to 48 has a better grasp of international economics than the Governor of the Bank of England. Why do you think Mark Carney's lying? 0345 6060 973. What's in it for him? Genuine question. I think after yesterday's epic innings at the crease, I'm not really in the mood for a scrap today. I just want to know what you think. I'm almost tempted to make a list. I probably will reserve the right to challenge absolute nonsense. That's all right, though, isn't it? Why do you think he's lying? Why would he lie? You know, and I know that the proper newspapers like the Times will report this straight. Bank warns of deep recession. House prices could fall by a third. Governor attacked over analysis. No-deal Brexit would be worst crash since the 1930s. He's shown his workings, 30% interest, 30% fall in house prices. These are all maximums. These are worst-case scenarios. You're perfectly entitled to pretend otherwise. He's not claiming this will definitely happen. He's saying it's a possibility, and the list is grim. It makes for very, very grim reading. Cue the Mewling pencil coming forward and suggesting that because he's Canadian, he somehow can't be trusted. Inaccurately describing him as a failed politician. And the country now once again picks a side. So you turn to the irresponsible newspapers and the coverage will be completely biased. Carney unleashes Project Hysteria, says the Daily Telegraph, a once mighty organ now reduced to effectively producing a tribute act to the former editor of the Daily Mail. Speaking of the Daily Mail, of course, they are embarked upon an astonishing exercise in turning the oil tanker around, so their front page becomes key cabinet Brexiteer. I'm backing May's deal. I'm not, for the record, but the move from the Daily Mail barking up absolutely crazy tree to recognising reality is an absolute joy to behold. And they're giving away a David Walliams audiobook on Saturday if you buy it in Tesco. So I advise you, if your children are anything like mine, to adjust your shopping habits accordingly. So the Eye, which is pretty close to straight, bank warns of worst economic slump since Second World War. The Mirror, May's deal will cost us £100 billion. That's the Treasury's own estimate, not actually the banks. And finally, the Daily Express, which is in this weird limbo now that it's owned by the same people as the Daily Mirror, but still, of course, trying to serve readers who lean more towards the gammon end of British politics. Bank boss Carney's Project Hysteria. So that's it, really. I get if I'd voted to leave and I wasn't yet ready to admit my mistake, I have to believe that everybody on the other side is corrupt or dodgy. That's where George Soros comes into it, this ludicrous argument that a Hungarian billionaire philanthropist is somehow funding, well, me, actually. I apparently get money off George Soros. So does Gina Miller, apparently gets a lot of money off George Soros. Speaking of Gina Miller, the vote that we're having on the deal, is that, and I should have asked Theo this before I came on air, is that a direct result of her? Was that the vote that she went to court for? And I know I'm supposed to be the font of all Brexit knowledge, but this one sort of ducked under my wire a bit. Because if it is, then surely all the people who hated her, and remember that a man got jailed for issuing really vile threats against her, this is the vote. So the only reason why Brexiters are getting to vote against Theresa's, is that, I need to check that. That would be an ultimate irony, wouldn't it? It can't be the case. I couldn't be the only one to point that out. It's the meaningful vote that she got. No, we'll check that. That would be absurd if all the Brexiters who created an environment that saw Gina Miller receive death threats and quite horrible racist abuse, turned out they have to thank them for the fact that they're getting the chance to vote down Theresa May's deal. That would be, for me, that would be the essence of Brexit. But we begin today with a rather different question, and that question is, if you are on the other side still, you still haven't seen the light, what in your mind when you say, right, Mark Carney's a liar, you know what I do? I don't want to know what you think. I want to know why you think it. So Mark Carney's making this up. Mark Carney's lying. Mark Carney is deliberately deceiving the British public. You believe that, which is fine, but I want you to tell me why you think he's doing it. What's in it for him? What motivates him to lie, to invent, to exaggerate? 0345 60 973. And if we want to get a bit psychological, then we'd be looking at, of course, this question. How could anybody favour a backbencher who can't count up to 48 over the governor of the Bank of England? A good governor. There have been bad governors of the Bank of England, but that's the point at which I kind of go all emperor's new clothes again. It is obviously beholden upon people still shilling for the billionaires who bankrolled Brexit to claim that Mark Carney doesn't know what he's talking about. But if you have bought into that notion, Project Hysteria or even Project Fear, which of course has transmogrified into Project Fact in the last 2.5 years, I'd love to know why you think Mark Carney is lying. 0345 60 973. Otis is in Lambeth. Otis, what would you like to say?
Hey, Otis. Sorry.
I'll be James. You be Otis.
Hey, James, how are you?
I'm good.
Sorry, I was in the middle of reading a report just now. Listen, I have nothing critical to say about Mark Carney because I'm Canadian. I've been living in this country here in London for the last 9 years. And when I saw Rees-Mogg give that idiotic, I'm sorry, there's no other word.
Oh, I could think of a few, but not before the
idiotic.
watershed. Carry on, go on.
Yeah, sometimes a lie can be so bad it can only be idiotic.
Yes.
Because this is a man where both political parties have been kissing his you-know-what for years to lead their political party because no one quite knows what he's about, right? In the sense that, he's not far right, he's not far left, he's just a sensible human being. His wife is an economist as well. She's a developmental economist, I think, here in the UK as well.
I hear you, and that's the point, isn't it? But do you think perhaps people who are so driven by their own agenda that they can't quite believe somebody else isn't? It's a bit like the former editor of the Daily Mail didn't believe it was possible for someone to be impartial because he was so consumed by his own bigotries and prejudices. So Jacob Rees-Mogg looks at someone who hasn't actually picked a side. He's on the side of sense. He's not on the side of, left or right or good or bad. And Rees-Mogg actually can't compute it. I'm being quite charitable, I think, because this line here, which you as a Canadian are quite right to bridle at, I think it discredits the governor, who is basically a failed second-rate Canadian politician who is talking down the pound, which I think is unprecedented.
The man is from the Northwest Territories. I think it was like Fort Smith or something. And he came from literally the most detached part of Canada you can possibly imagine. All right? Narnia is closer than Fort. Okay?
Yes.
And you need to understand something. You're giving Rees-Mogg way too much credit. There is no way this man is leading this insanity. He is a puppet of another puppet of another puppet. His politics have not changed a bit from his own father's. Yeah, I've been doing my homework. I know this country pretty well.
For people who perhaps haven't done as much homework as you, Rees-Mogg's father wrote a book and a number of articles explaining how wealthy people could make a killing out of economic difficulties and financial, out of recessions, actually.
Carney's policies encouraged banks to be under-leveraged before the crisis hit in 2007. Incompetent people don't do things like that.
That was in Canada.
Yeah, so under-leverage, meaning just because banks were allowed to do a thing, they did not do that thing because the word should enters their metrics.
So he insulated Canada, did he, from some of the worst impacts of that crisis?
Oh, my God, did he ever. And we bounced back in terms of our employment rate.
But I suppose if we...
every other country.
Yeah, and if we take your point about Rees-Mogg's father, which may be a little bit unfair, but he certainly hasn't disassociated himself from those teachings, then, of course, you have to see here is a banker that protected the country from the worst impacts of recession. Here is a banker, that's closer to rhyming slang, I think. He's not a banker, he's a fund manager. Here is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who subscribes to a school of thought that promotes the idea of making money out of recessions. So, of course, he's not going to like a central banker who manages to steer clear of recession. Well, just a thought. Thank you, Otis. David's in Snowdon, lovely part of the world. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Always a pleasure.
Carry on.
In the wind and the rain.
Yes, I was in Brecon at the weekend, and closer to your neck of the woods than I've been in a while. You're very, very lucky. Anyway, carry on.
Okay, I'll tell you what it is. When you come out with these experts and that, and he comes across as a very genuine guy, and he comes across as a guy that is putting a lot of effort into his job. But when I hear you come out with these experts and that, to me, I'm just a layperson. I'm just a worker. And these people are running the company. It's like Gina Miller. When she talks, she talks about the country as if it's a limited company. And for me, I don't see the same things as these people. I don't see these. I'm not going to get these vast profits due to mass migration. I'm not going to get these vast profits due to trade and everything.
Have you got a mortgage?
1,000 jobs. Sorry?
Have you got a mortgage?
Yeah, I have got a mortgage. But I will never ever be able to.
You have interest rates on your mortgage.
Yeah,
well,
it's fixed mortgage anyway.
The top line of Mark Carney's analysis is, of course, house prices and interest rates, which has nothing to do with big business and everything to do with people like you, David.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, if I was going to lose some money on my house and that. I mean, house prices are over-exaggerated anyway. I mean,
so you want to lose money on your house?
I do, well, nobody wants to lose money, but I think in a modern society, I think
if the house comes down in value, if interest rates go up and the house comes down in value, you could end up owing more than the house is worth, of course.
But you also assume that I could afford to actually sell my house, and the way
I'm not assuming anything, mate. You're the one that wants it to be worth less than it is now.
I will probably be in this house until I die because I couldn't afford to.
Well, let's hope that you don't move into negative equity then, because unless your income goes up, which he's also saying it won't, you could end up not able to meet your own.
But it has.
Not able to meet your own mortgage payments. So let's just go back.
James,
hang on, mate. I want to go back to what you.
James, can I just say? No, you pulled me up on the thing there. You said about negative equity.
Yes.
Right. And since the Brexit vote, and since the flood from the EU has been drying up a bit, there is a lot more work. There's a lot more opportunity, and the wages have gone up.
Well, so for you,
for Brexit
for you,
has been sort of great for me and the wife.
What line of work are you in?
Well, I do, mine is sort of applied physics and that. I do research and development, but hers is
So you've got your wages gone up in the last 3 years as an applied physicist doing research and development. Did you hear Sir Paul Nurse on the programme?
Especially with the wife's pharmacy, because what was happening was these companies were going abroad and they were recruiting pharmacists from abroad.
Right.
So the wages here just dropped because there was this influx of pharmacists.
Okay.
Since the Brexit vote, it's dried up a bit. So the wages have gone up. There's loads more work. It's great. It's happy days.
Okay, so I believe you, mate. Seriously, most people listening do as well, I'm sure. And I mean, the former head of the Royal Society, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Sir Paul Nurse, when he explained that scientific research, which is what you do, will be absolutely decimated by Brexit. He's probably wrong as well, is he?
Well, it wasn't before, because you had Brian Cox on him. Funny enough, I actually was taught physics by one of Brian Cox's.
But I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about
Brian.
I'm talking about Sir Paul Nurse.
Yeah. And if you can let me answer you,
you're talking about Brian Cox.
Before all this, you were saying about how are we going to sort of our standards and everything. How are we going to, sort of meet these regulations with Europe?
No, I never said that, mate.
Pharmacopoeia.
David, I'm enjoying talking to you, but you're saying I've said things that I've never said. So here's why you rang in. You rang in to say Mark Carney doesn't really speak about things that are relevant to me.
Yeah, I can't really relate to him.
Can I just have a little go?
Sure.
Oh, thanks, mate.
Go on, have a pop.
No, it's not a pop. I just want to remind you of what you said.
Okay.
Because often these people forget. You said that he doesn't really speak about things that affect you. So I mentioned mortgages and interest rates, and you ended up effectively saying that it will be okay if your house goes down in value and your mortgage goes up. Now, hand on heart, you don't mean that, do you?
If I sometimes think that...
No, again, hand on heart, you don't mean that, do you? If I said now, here's the choice, okay? Here is tomorrow. Your house is worth less and your mortgage costs more, or you stay where you are now. What would you choose, David?
If it meant a good...
No, David, simple, A or B.
If it meant that my children could afford houses and they could have a better future...
So you're on the radio now saying you want your house to go down in value and you want your mortgage payments to go up.
Nobody wants it, but I would accept it for a better future for my children. So that's what I'm asking.
Do you want
the country.
Okay, so you think your children are going to have a better chance of getting on the housing ladder if interest rates go up?
My children would have a better chance if the houses came down in price, because there's no way there's no point in saying
why would people sell that? Why would people be more likely to sell their house if it's come down in value? It's a supply and demand issue at the moment.
Well, they're not. But when they build new houses, you want to see the new houses around here. They're executive houses that I couldn't afford.
Okay.
So how are children going to be able to afford these things?
Yeah, I hear you, and they're going to be able to afford them a lot more easily if interest rates go up. So we'll just agree. We'll park that. Simple question.
Well, no, but the prices will come down.
Yeah, the prices will come down, and that's good because you want your house to be worth less. We've already established that.
Yeah, but you're talking hypetical, aren't you?
Well,
again,
everything's hypothetical. It's an economic forecast
David,
David, mate,
just hit it on the nail.
Yes, well, hit the nail on the head is the phrase you're looking for, but everybody listening already knew that. So here's the thing. Why do you think Mark Carney exaggerates or fibs? What do you think's in it for him?
I don't think he does.
So he's right then? He's right about everything?
He looks at things from a totally different perspective. Things that affect big business, and they affect people who've got
it's
millions
mortgage
of pounds.
rates and house prices. How can you say that only affects big
It won't
business?
affect my children. If the house prices drop down by a third tomorrow, my children would be better off in that. At least they could raise the deposit.
I love you, mate, and I hope you're right. I really do, for your children's sake. The worst recession since the 1930s, and you think it would be great.
No, I didn't say it would be great. I was saying you've got a different interpretation.
Well, I have. Yeah, I think crashes are really bad, and you don't, and that's fine. 10:32. Simon Conway's got the headlines. Hey, man, I don't like doing this. I sometimes check on what stuff people have told me during a phone call after the phone call has ended, often hoping that they're right, so that you can find little glimmers of hope and reasons to be positive. I don't think David really meant that he wants his house to go down in value, and the likelihood of his children being able to get on the property ladder, of course, would not be increased by a recession, because that would see GDP fall, wages fall, unemployment rise. But still, you look for the little things to cling on to. So the thing he said about his wife and being a pharmacist, it might be different in Wales, but in May of this year, it was reported that government cuts had seen 156 pharmacies close in the wake of funding cuts. In November of this, just last week, actually, there was a conference for the pharmaceutical industry, and they're really struggling to hire staff. It is becoming more difficult to fill the roles of pharmacists, and nigh on impossible to fill pharmacy technician vacancies in Kent, Surrey and Sussex, a trend that has also been seen in London. That's the local pharmaceutical committee's health education spokesperson, I think, Gail Fleming. And I don't know, maybe I misunderstood. Universal staffing difficulties reported by Scottish pharmacy owners. That's from last week in the Pharmaceutical Journal. And from the Pharmaceutical Journal at the end of October, pharmacies could struggle to recruit in a no-deal Brexit. So I don't know. I always presume people are telling me the truth, unless I know that they're not. And if I don't know that they're not, I often check in the hope that they are. But the sector in which David's wife works is... well, no one else in it thinks life looks good. Back to the question of why Mark Carney would fib. Neil's in Market Drayton. Neil, why do you think he's fibbing?
Good morning, James. Well, basically, I'm going to sit down because I was a UKIP chairman in North Shropshire, and basically, if you look at over the time of when Brexit actually started and before. The message is quite clear that there was the Project Fear, as they call it. I don't know these names people give to these things, but it was Project Fear. And I think a lot of the information coming out, especially for Mark Carney, who seemed to be part of that, it's just being repeated. It is actually fear. I mean, we all knew that the country would go through some period of chaos, if you want to put it that way.
UKIP's official position was that we'd be immediately better off. But you don't need me to tell you that. You were a chairman. Well, the leader said that, of course.
No. On many TV interviews, I do listen to your programme regularly, actually, because I like to know what the other side are saying.
Yes,
it's
what it feels like to be right, mate.
Well, that's your opinion.
No, it's not, you see. It's not an opinion.
Well, it is. If you think you're right, it's an opinion, isn't it?
No, it isn't. No. What's 2 plus 2? What's 2 plus 2?
Anyway.
All right, you carry on. So why do you think, what's he need for Mark Carney? Why do you think he fibs and exaggerates?
Well, it's all part of the system, isn't it, basically?
I don't know. I want you to tell me.
Well, this is what I've gathered over the time of listening. I mean, there was plenty of information out there given to people if they wanted to attend meetings. I organised loads of meetings. So the information was out there. It was obviously if people wanted to actually take it up.
Forgive me, I'm just going to push you towards the question that I'm asking, because let's say you're right and it is just opinions. So why do you think, in your opinion, the Governor of the Bank of England is lying to the country?
Because they just don't want to take us out of the EU.
Why not?
Why?
Yeah.
Because I think I've been looking at this. I really do think that it's going to open a can of worms We was never informed.
What's going to
that
open
the
a can of
treaties-
worms?
It's going to, well, if we come out of the EU,
Yes.
okay, it's going to it will open up all the information that our ex-politicians like Blair, Brown, Major signed us up to, okay?
Well, so
it'll
there's
show that
secret stuff. There's secret stuff that's only going to come
Well,
out
it's not
after
much
we leave.
secret,
Well, what
'cause-
then? There's
well,
stuff that we
basically-
don't already know, is there, Neil?
Well, the reasons why the politicians, it's only the major politicians, our servants, who are actually wanting us to stay in the EU.
Well, it was half the country that voted as well, and most polls now have a majority for remaining. You're not suggesting that 48% of the country was all politicians, are you?
No, I think through the media,
Yeah.
and the
That's
discrimination
the
against
80%
Actually-
pro-leave media. 80%, according to conservative estimates of
Well,
newspaper coverage, was in favour of leaving.
Okay, well, most of the coverage I always saw.
Well, what papers do you read?
Sky News.
What
I don't
papers?
read any papers.
Oh, okay.
I don't read any. I don't have any. I don't have the TV.
Sky News is bound by Ofcom to be completely impartial. So where do you get your
it's
news
like
from? What are your main news
it's like
sources?
The Electoral Commission, no, that's supposed to be neutral, but it's
Well,
mostly made up
it is
of
neutral, Neil.
Remainers.
Okay.
Okay, you're just neutrally ignored. Yeah, go on anyway. What
Right,
was you going to say?
let's have another crack at the question that you rang in to answer. What do you think motivates Mark Carney to... Well, let's just stay with fibbing and exaggerating, and let's maybe save for another day the idea that there's lots and lots of secrets that are going to come out after we leave. And let's just... Yeah. So why do you think he's lying, then? What's in it for him?
What's in it for him? Basically, well, I don't know what drives Mark Carney, but all I can say is being on the outside...
But when you look at him and you think, well, he's not telling the truth, you must surely somewhere in your brain there's a voice that says, why isn't he telling the truth? So why do you think he's lying now?
For the past 10 years, I've been following the European Union.
Right, but you don't read any papers.
Well, I don't need to, because I can think for myself. I don't need newspapers.
No. So how do you follow the European Union without reading reports? What reports do you rely on of the European Union?
Well, I did. I did listen to the news.
Right.
I get most of my stuff off the internet.
Oh, I see. So, I mean, whether it's off the internet or not, again, why do you think he fibs and lies? What do you think is in it for him, Neil?
Well, as I said,
yeah.
Because I've delved into the subject of the EU.
Well, that's why I can't wait to hear what you found.
It's simply because people who actually, as you say, see the light, okay, about what's really going on.
Can I just steer back to Mark Carney?
No, but it's all part of it, isn't it, James? You can't just.
Well, I don't know part of what. I'm
Basically,
getting,
the 10 years I've been following the EU, right, it's quite obvious that there's the New World or the New Order agenda going on.
The New World Order agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mark Carney's part of that, is he?
Yes.
What is the New World Order agenda? What are they hoping to achieve, Neil?
Well, you know yourself.
I've got no idea, mate. I've got no idea.
You do. You've been told loads of times. They want to create what I call USSR.
Okay.
And basically, you know, we was told when you saw the Farage and Clegg debate, and Clegg turned around and actually said about not having an EU army.
Because we would have a veto, Neil, if we were in the EU. So what he said was we could never sign up to an army we didn't want because we'd be able to veto it as members.
You say this, but how do you know in the future? I mean, it's like this backstop.
Lordy. So, last question again.
No, it's like the backstop.
It's just like the backstop, yeah, you're right. Is that the New World Order as well?
May has turned around and said that we won't have to stay in it long. But you don't believe the politicians because they've told us loads of lies in the past.
Well, you do believe some politicians, oddly. So let's focus on that question there. And I don't know whether it's part of the New World Order or you found it on the internet, but why is Mark Carney not telling the truth, Neil?
Well, I've already explained.
No, you haven't, mate. What's in it for him? What's his reward as a Canadian banker from the EU SSR, as you like to call it?
Okay, you're asking me to make an opinion, right?
No, I'm asking what thinking has informed your opinion. I know your opinion.
He's lying.
Yes,
he's lying because everything that has been said against the EU has been opened up, and it's totally true.
Right.
It's totally true. It's like you said,
So,
you've got
no,
to do
hang on
your
a minute.
research, haven't you?
Well,
You've got to do your research. So I've done research for over 10 years.
Well, then, could you please just tell me what is Mark Carney's reward for telling these lies?
Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? Well, you do, mate.
Who knows?
Because you're the one who thinks he's lying. I don't think he is. So if I thought he was lying, I'd be able to tell you why he was lying. I'd be able to say, for example, well, that fella over there with the
I've just told you why he's lying.
Go on, why?
I've followed everything that the EU has been doing, and I've listened to both sides. Listen, do you really think that if you... Do you realise that... Oh, sorry, I don't mean to be rude on that. Do you think that if everything... No, I don't want to be rude. If you think...
You're not going to answer my question, are you, mate?
I've answered it.
When you said who knows?
You've got to know what's been said, and you've got to have done your research, like you
That's it.
you keep saying. And basically, everything that has been said that the EU wouldn't do, the EU is doing.
Yeah.
Like the European Army. That was 10 years. People knew about this who did research. Over 10 years
but
ago.
it can be vetoed by. It can be vetoed by. I mean, we are going round in circles, mate. But I've enjoyed talking to you, Neil. I hope you have a lovely Christmas. Where I'm just trying, and it can be an odd experience, to say the least. I'm trying to look beneath the bonnet of people who subscribe to the notion that the governor of the Bank of England is being somehow dishonest or dishonourable when he describes what he believes and what the bank believes could be the upshot of a no-deal Brexit. The short answer is an utterly avoidable disaster. The worst crash since the 1930s. Worst case scenario, of course. Britain would be plunged into its deepest recession since the 1930s under a disorderly no-deal Brexit. So I suspect that Mark Carney being Canadian is relevant, tragically. Jacob Rees-Mogg certainly referred to it as if it was somehow pertinent to his performance or abilities. And I suspect it is. So maybe I should be saying, why would the Bank of England be lying and exaggerating? What's in it for them? But I'll do either. Answers so far, the last fella, Neil, in Market Drayton, thinks that Mark Carney is helping to usher in a new world order or an EU SSR. Yeah, I know it sounds unkind, but if I repeat his words back to you and he sounds bonkers, is that my fault? Unless, of course, you don't think he sounds bonkers and you do think that after researching stuff on the internet, there is a desire for a new world order in place and Mark Carney is somehow part of it. What about the rest of the Bank of England? Are they all in on it? 0345 606 0973, or our first caller, David in Snowdon, who doesn't think that Mark Carney speaks about things that affect him. House prices could fall by 30%, interest rates could rise to 5.5%, and the economy could shrink by 8%, which is worse than what happened during the 2008 financial crisis. So I don't really understand that either, actually, how you can claim that this stuff won't affect you. It's all about big business, house prices, interest rates, and jobs. And speaking of jobs, earlier caller suggested that the pharmaceutical sector is doing really, really well since Brexit, but I've triple-checked now, and the pharmaceutical sector is not aware of this. David is in Primrose Hill. David, what would you like to say?
It's the first time I've had the pleasure of talking to you, James.
Well, it might not prove to be a pleasure, David. It's early days.
Well, I wish to put the perspective is that the one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. We've had this situation in the past. I can remember in 1945, going back, I'm 75 years old, when after the war kids had to have ration stamps to get food because we were cut off from everybody except the Americans, who of course plunged us into debt, which took a while ago we managed to pay off. People have totally forgotten. You know, it's like how I learned to stop worrying and love economic disaster. That's what seems to have taken over.
So I sense you're not here to put flesh on the bones of why Mark Carney would be trying to mislead the British people. You're, like me, leaning towards the notion that he's probably more right than wrong.
Well, like the last caller, there's a lot of people who love conspiracy theories, never read the news, and live in their own little world and make things up for themselves and draw their own conclusion, including, I would put my voice, the one called Rees-Mogg, who tends to know everything and everybody else knows nothing at all.
Especially Canadians.
Especially Canadians. They're foreigners, you know. We can't deal with them.
Cheap
so
shoes.
what I do is I trust the Southern Irish and put all my money over there and then short-term everything and make a big profit like my co-conspirator Soros.
Cheap shoes for peasants.
Absolutely right on the nail. The thing is, a lot of people don't live in reality. The fact is, if you was, for example, to import chicken, chlorinated chicken from America because we couldn't get it from the EU, for example,
yes.
we then bake a pie over here, but of course we couldn't export it to Europe because they wouldn't have the safety measures in place to deal with our particular chlorinated chicken. And same with Rolls-Royce, who import all their parts from all over the world, and they go backwards and forwards between Europe and us. We'd never be able to do it because we get the parts and every single piece would have to be the thing, and then they talk about World Trade Organization.
I have a feeling that you don't believe enough in Brexit, David.
I certainly not. It's a bit like, I would call it breakfast and banning double eggs, bacon and sausage.
Go on. Oh, I see what you mean. It's not breakfast. It's breakfast in name only.
That's right.
David.
The only trouble is it's a very badly cooked breakfast, and I wouldn't like to swallow it.
As the patron saint of torturous analogies, I think we might be going a little bit too far down this particular road at the moment. Why has it taken you so long to phone me, David?
Well, you see, you're so much in demand that it's a bit like trying to ring Madonna up. You're on that pinnacle up there, and from Primrose Hill, we're only on the low area. So to reach your shady height, it's very difficult for me at 75. I haven't got the energy to climb without oxygen.
Right, we will give you the golden number, the secret trunk line, what's it called, hotline number that is reserved only. There isn't really one, but we shall do our best to look out for David's name next time it pops up on the switchboard. I've got nothing, though, apart from a nice hearty chuckle. Nothing at all. Why would he fib? 0345 606 0973. And if you don't ring me, then we are only left with the idea that if you are part of the It's All Project Hysteria, It's All Project Fear, your spokespeople today are talking about the New World Order, and people like me are left with little choice but to think that's what you all believe. Why is Mark Carney doing this if he's not acting in good faith? Why is the Bank of England lying to England? 0345 606 0973. Rory's in Dublin. Rory, what would you like to say?
Hi, hey, how you doing? How's things, James? So my point is this, that Mark Carney isn't lying, first of all.
Yes, he is. It's
he's
Project
playing
Hysteria.
two camps.
Go on.
Is what he's really doing. So he's basically got on one hand, he knows that leaving the EU, Brexit, will be a disaster for British industry and will be a disaster for the British people at large. That he knows that, and that's what this warning is about. That's what he's telling the people. But on the other hand, he knows that to stay in the EU would be a big problem for the City of London. Because, and this is the main reason, is that regulations, EU regulations that will come in
on tax avoidance. But why would he be trying?
Well, not necessarily tax avoidance. Specifically, these MiFID II is the main regulation.
Offshore
what that's
money.
going to do is it's going to basically stop offshore money.
Just pause a bit, because I think you probably know more about this than I do. So I don't understand why he would be working so hard to originally resist Brexit when he was essentially offering up economic analysis in support of the Remain position, and now he would be warning very, very passionately against no deal while simultaneously wanting to leave.
Well, you see, that's a really good question, right? So there's the question.
Well, it's not, mate. I'm kind of cautiously suggesting that you're a bit bonkers. So it's not a good. How could he be simultaneously wanting to remain and leave at the same time?
Well, as I'm saying, James, I think that is a good question, and the reason is because it does seem a bit contradictory, right?
A bit.
And it's the same with lots of the players. It seems the same with lots of the players.
So what is he doing?
March.
What is he doing to accelerate leaving then? What pronouncements or policies has he enacted?
He's not, because it seems to me that the only solution that they've come up with is this. Let's say May's deal that she's got on the table at the moment. What that looks like it might do for the City of London is it kicks the can of EU regulation down the road a few years. You know what I mean? It gives them an opportunity to try and work out a solution.
You've lost me, Rory, and I'm sure it's my fault. I'm sure it's my fault, but you've lost me completely. So he simultaneously wants to remain and leave because the City of London, which, with a few exceptions, was entirely in favour of remaining, secretly want to leave as well.
No.
All right, well, I'll go back over the tape and try and work it out again. Thank you, mate. It's 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 3 minutes after 11. Carney writes Luis is not playing any camp. He has simply presented the worst-case scenario in order to prepare against it. It doesn't mean that precise worst-case scenario will definitely happen. This is all about Brexiters hating reality. And if you hate reality, I suppose, in the absence of any other explanation, that there's something attractive about believing in things like a new world order, or what else is it? Cultural Marxism, or the Bilderberg Group. Is that one of these? I mean, that actually exists. And what's the other one as well? I had to look this up when I was writing my book because I didn't actually know what it meant, but it popped up in my inbox so often I thought I should find out. Common purpose. Do you know, are you familiar with that? It's another reason to buy my book, which I'm delighted to tell you is back in stock after Amazon, much to their own surprise, completely sold out. Back in stock, still at a bargain price. Fill your boots. Buy one for the gammon in your life. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Why would he lie? Why would the Bank of England lie to England? Tell me that, Jacob. And fans, Jacob and Sons. 0345 606 0973. That's all I want to know. Why would the Bank of England lie to England about the impact of a no-deal Brexit? Because I can't, for the life of me, begin to understand how anyone could think they would do that. So that's the question. And that's why, of course, that's why Rees-Mogg has picked up on his foreignness. I think he's a naturalised citizen now, actually. Didn't he accept citizenship last week, Mark Carney? But that's why. Because if I say to you, why would the Bank of England lie to England, you think, oh, yeah, good point, James, he probably isn't lying. But if I say to you, why is this Canadian talking down our country? Then, of course, you can go, yeah, Canadians. Damn them with their big trees and maple syrup. I hate them. Damn those Canadians. So why is the Bank of England lying to England? Well, don't be daft, mate. Of course it isn't. It's just doing its job. Why would a Canadian talk down Brexit? Oh, because he secretly hates Britain and wants us to become part of the EU SSR. If you're unhappy with that analysis, give me a cleverer one. Because that's all I've got so far, and I've been here for an hour. Sharon is in Brussels, appropriately enough. Sharon, what can you tell us?
Well, I would just say that he's doing his job.
Yes, but his job is to shill for George Soros and the New World Order, so ha.
Well, I can tell you it certainly doesn't feel like the EU, USSR here in Brussels at all.
Well, you would say that. You've got Stockholm Syndrome.
Maybe. But I have lots of British friends here, huh? There are a lot of us here.
Yes, I know.
We feel that we're helping move Europe forward in a way which is good for Britain, so, you know.
So what... I mean, you're then, again, like David, we're trying to unpick the brains of people who we don't understand, and they can't all be like the callers we had earlier, talking about new world orders or welcoming a collapse in house prices and a rise in interest rates. In good faith, what arguments can you imagine someone making to explain why the Bank of England would lie to England?
Because they can't face up to the fact that Brexit is not actually a very good idea.
So you could now, you would now argue anything. You'd argue that the moon was made of cheese, that black was white, that, you know, that you can have cake and eat it, and that there's such a thing as alternative facts.
Exactly. I mean, if you think the EU, USSR is the problem, it might be worth having a look at. There's a website called www.badboysofbrexit.com. It's an easy one to remember. Yes. Badboysofbrexit.com. And I would suggest that those people who think that Brexit is a good thing should just have a look at what the possible motivations of the people who have foisted Brexit onto us might be.
I haven't read it, and I'm not familiar with it yet, but I shall be by close of play today. The other thing I'd point them to is, of course, the Euro myths, which is on the European Union's own website, an utterly encyclopedic 30-year record of all the lies that the British public have been told by the newspapers. But, of course, no one believes the lies in the newspapers, Sharon, because they do their own research and they get their news from the internet.
Yeah, well, I had a look at the internet because someone was telling me that, it's all Project Fear. I don't want to look at the future. I just want to look at the past since June 2016.
Yeah.
And what we see is that the economic growth in the UK, which used to be, pretty good, is now right at the bottom of the EU league table, if you want to put it that way. And
yes.
I just looked up a thing. It's statistics. Ireland is growing 3.2%. The UK, 0.1%. I mean, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, and that's because business is not feeling too certain about what's going to happen in the UK.
Good time to be a pharmacist,
not buying
though,
into all these great opportunities.
Good time to be a pharmacist in Wales, though, on the other hand.
Well, I mean, you've got Pfizer as a company. I think they've put aside £100 million pounds to be able to prepare for Brexit because for a hard Brexit because it will be a disaster.
And that money gets passed on to customers who are almost by definition poorly.
Of course, and if our economy is weaker, then how can we shore up the NHS?
I don't know, but at least my children will be able to buy a house, apparently.
Yeah, well, if house prices go down, that could be a good thing for our children. But I think that our children are thinking more about the fact that they might not be able to travel in the way that they could. I mean, my daughter, she almost broke into tears when she heard about the Brexit thing. I mean, it was just like, but what about us? She couldn't vote, of course, because she was only 17 at the time.
Sure, and we've taken away their freedoms, but that apparently is something that Mrs May thinks we should be celebrating, because freedom's bad. What do you do in Brussels, if you don't mind me asking? So
I'm a public affairs consultant. I advise business on dealing with the EU. And in particular, I actually even chaired the trade committee of the American Chamber of Commerce to the EU, so I have been following trade negotiations very closely.
Are you you're one of those experts, aren't you, Sharon?
I am. I am one of those terrible experts.
We have no time for you in Brexit Britain. What's going to happen in terms of your personal circumstances? Do you know at this point in proceedings?
Well, I've actually taken on a Belgian nationality because it's so unclear about what's going to happen. And I will keep my British nationality, and I hope to God that I will be able to keep both.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people here. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the Irish GDP is going up, because
just solely from the passport
so many Brits
office
are becoming Irish.
Passport office payments alone. Sharon, I hope we can talk again. I am obviously not a member of the school of thought that considers experts to be worthless. That's Michael Gove's position, of course. And one presumes Jacob Rees-Mogg. Or is Jacob Rees-Mogg all right with English experts? Is it just Canadian ones he doesn't like? We should probably ask him. Perhaps he could ring in next time he's on LBC. Nigel is in Bournemouth. Nigel, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm afraid I also cannot add anything to your search to try and find what's underneath the bonnet, as you say it, or hood, as I would call it. I'm half Canadian. To find out what's
half a boo.
Half a boo. Well, I'll tell you what. There are lots of trees out there. You're quite right, and there's lots of all sorts of things. But I'll tell you what there is not.
Yes.
There is not a bank that's failed.
Oh.
Canada went through the same 2007, 2008 crash that everybody else did, but our banks weathered it. And the reason the banks weathered it is because we had a really good head of the Bank of Canada, who was Mark Carney, who put in place a whole lot of regulations and tests that banks had to qualify for. And you know what? Our banks are doing really well.
Are they?
Compare that to RBC.
Yeah.
RBS. RBC's Royal Bank of Canada. Oops.
Yeah.
And, I cannot understand why Rees-Mogg, who called Mark Carney a second-rate politician, I think.
A failed politician and a second-tier banker. I mean, but is he a failed politician? Did he try to go? I know he was at Goldman Sachs, and then, I mean, when did he try to get into politics?
I don't believe he ever did. Or at least, if he did, it didn't cross my radar.
No. I'm sure Rees-Mogg hasn't just made it up.
I would call Rees-Mogg a failed third-rate politician, because, quite frankly, he's got a big mouth, but nothing else to back it up.
He's got a very big forehead.
And I gather 6 children.
Yes, I'm not going to hold that against him.
Well, no, but I posted something on a website this morning accusing him of having no male parts either, a big mouth and no male parts.
Oh, I see, and you were comprehensively disproved by the number of progeny.
Interestingly enough,
go on.
My wife and I took different sides on the Brexit issue.
Really?
Yeah, she took the view that she did not want to tie Britain's fortunes, and we're both Jewish as well.
Yes.
Which comes into this,
of course,
to the possibility of another 27 potentially increasingly right-wing economies and countries in Europe.
Yes.
She didn't trust them, quite frankly.
Fair enough.
And that's a view. That's
do you know, that's the second time I've heard that view. The other person who shared it with me isn't Jewish. But it surprises me, because they point to the rise of Orban in Hungary and similar tides perhaps moving in bigger European European countries, and I do understand it now. I didn't at first. I laughed at it, but it has to be pointed out that the far right in this country almost all support the idea of leaving the European Union as well. So I appreciate that you're speaking for your wife. How does she square that circle? I'm going to get into bed with homegrown fascists in the hope of not being beholden to foreign fascists.
Well, at least, firstly, you're dealing with 1/27th or 1/28th of the number of them.
Yes.
And second, I suspect, and I can't speak for her, she actually is back in Toronto right now.
Okay.
But
well, I look forward to her calling me then.
But the other side of that, if I may,
is
I voted for Brexit.
Yes.
I'm sorry, in fact, against Brexit.
Yes.
I voted to stay in, and I'm a Remainer. Because, quite frankly, I wasn't confident enough that we have the politicians and the civil servants who can actually make a success of the total change that there would need to be after Brexit. We're going to have to change.
I suspect there's common ground there. The difference being that you're sort of saying there isn't anyone that could do it, and the other lot who are probably recognising the reality of what you describe are still labouring under the illusion that a mewling pencil like Jacob Rees-Mogg could somehow pull a magic unicorn out of his top hat. But you speak to similar things, and I am interested in that the rise of the far right in Europe has prompted me to want to leave. It's not the first time I've heard it, but I do return again to the question of why getting into bed with, the kind of people that unveiled that Breaking Point poster a few hours before Joe Cox was murdered by a man shouting Britain first. How on earth is getting into bed with them going to protect us from the rising tide of far-right politics in continental Europe, especially when you consider that the bloke who unveiled that poster has turned up to speak to fascists in France and in Germany. There might be an answer, and that maybe it is strength in numbers. I've got more faith in the British people to resist the rise of such toxic politics than I have in Italian people, for example, because, of course, they ushered Mussolini into power while we were kicking 7 shades of so-and-so out of Oswald Mosley's crew. Why would the Bank of England lie to England about the impact of a no-deal Brexit? And I'm not really doing very well today. I apologise. I haven't got much. Why would he do it? Why would the Bank of England lie to England about the biggest economic decision or the biggest economic event of the last 100 years? Or so, peacetime. I don't know why he would do it, but I don't think he is. So if you do think he is, you need to tell me why he is. Glenn's been in touch. He writes, I voted to leave in the belief that there'd be extra funding for the NHS, brackets, red bus brackets, as my wife is a dietitian within the service. I'm now scared to leave the EU, not for me, but for my daughter, as we, quotes, the people, quotes, voted for hope, only to receive uncertainty about our future. Again, as you can probably tell, I'm not enjoying the pulling down of pants process as much as I used to do. Yesterday for me was a very sobering show. I used to love the kind of fun and frolics of exposing people's ignorance. Is that the right word? But it's not funny anymore, because as I said to Andy yesterday, after demonstrating to him with proof that everything he said was false, everything he believed was untrue, and at the end of the call I said, you're going to go away still thinking that you're right, aren't you? And he said, yeah. It was a beautiful moment of trust between us, that, because doesn't make any sense at all to me, and yet I know it. So today, Governor of the Bank of England, the whole of the Bank of England, warns that the country has embarked upon a path that could be truly disastrous, and yet you're going to persuade yourself that he's lying rather than that you're wrong. And I don't get why we can't just transfer the responsibility away from individual voters to the people that lied to us. And then I suppose the media has to bear some responsibility, because what do after Mark Carney comes out with economic analysis from the Bank of England? They get Jacob Rees-Pencil on the telly to start banging on about how Canadian he is. That's what I mean when I say this model of balance has really betrayed the British people. So what you need is I mean, it doesn't exist, does it really, a body as august as the Bank of England. You can get a former Bank of England banker to criticise the decision, and there is one, Andrew Sentance, a former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. He's criticised, and I find that more pertinent than Jacob Rees-Mogg's criticism, but the media being what it is, they put the person you've heard of at the top of the story, not the person that you hadn't. So hopefully Andrew Sentance is right. And the bank is, no, because he says the bank's appearing to use forecasts to support political objectives. So again, I'd ask Andrew Sentance, why would the Bank of England lie to England? Although, for the record, Andrew Sentance strongly opposes Brexit as well. So again, his criticism begins to carry a little bit more weight. Andrew Sentance, former member of the Monetary Policy Committee, says, look, I think Brexit's a ridiculous idea, but I don't like what the Bank of England has done today. That's really interesting. The bloke promising cheap shoes for peasants should not be in this story. We've learnt nothing. David Davis, absolute abject ignorance about what would happen after Brexit. I'll be in Germany, not Brussels. I'll be in Berlin, not Brussels. The German car industry won't let this happen. Do you know what he did last night? Him and Dominic Raab were on stage at an award ceremony hosted by the right-wing magazine The Spectator, published by the scrupulously impartial BBC presenter Andrew Neil. And he accepted an award for Resignation of the Year, but he had to share it with Dominic Raab, who also turned up, despite the fact that Andrew Adonis and others were having a debate about Brexit in Dominic Raab's constituency. And the picture is astonishing, and the comment from the editor of The Spectator, it's like it's a suitable scene for a joke. The country is circling the plug hole, potentially. And I think everyone can agree on that. Even if you're a unicornist, this deal of Theresa May's is demonstrably inferior to what we've got now. But if you're wealthy and you work for the right-wing media and you're mates with Andrew Neil, oh, yes, that's just a bit of fun. I know, let's give them both Resignation of the Year. Oh, chuckles, chuckles, chuckles. It's still a game for them, guys. It's still a flipping game for them. And that's why I don't get angry anymore with people who ring me repeating the nonsense, even with Neil in Market Drayton with his New World Order EU SSR. Absolute hogwash. I can't get angry with him. He's not a bad person. Who's led him into such a dark place? That's who I get angry with. And they're still laughing. They're laughing at him. I'm not. Stephen is in Marlborough in Wiltshire. Stephen, what would you like to say? Why do you think the Bank of England is lying to England?
No, morning, James. I'm afraid I can't agree.
Oh, come on. I'm just going to tell off my staff in a Nick Ferrari style. Why are you putting through all these people who are on the same side of history as me? Put through some people who disagree, will you? Carry on, Stephen.
I'm just going to disappoint you even further. However, I think the Bank of England and Mark Carney are actually duty-bound to do this sort of thing.
No, I did as well. But that's why Andrew Sentance was quite interesting. He's a former member of the MPC. He thinks that they are politicising their forecasts.
OK, so I liken them a little bit towards, let's say, the Met Office.
Yes.
So let's say that there's a hurricane on its way. Now, we don't get hit by hurricanes.
No.
But all the models show that the hurricane is still 7 days away.
Yes.
And they are going to say to us, we believe that the hurricane is going to hit us, a 90% chance of it hitting, 10% chance it might miss.
Yes.
We are going to give you the warning that at 2 days out, you need to go and shutter up your windows, board your windows up. Actually, nobody gives a toss 7 days out.
Yes.
At 5 days out, people start to think, maybe this is actually going to happen. 2 days out, those that have run out of wood and can't put the shutters up on the windows are saying, why didn't you warn us that this was going to happen?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same concept.
Hang on, I can go further. I've got another chapter as the patron saint of torturous analogies. And then, if it doesn't happen, they will turn around and say, well, I'm never going to believe you again. I'm never going to trust...
What they'll do is actually say to you, you could have cost me a whole load of wood by shutting up my windows, but it missed. So I've saved some money, and you were wrong in all your forecasts.
Yeah, it is. I like that. Forecasts are not infallible. That is the whole point. But then we are still puzzling over the question. A few people are pointing out the Bank of England governs the whole of the United Kingdom. I do appreciate that, but it's a pithy little phrase. That's why I'm doing it. Why would the Bank of England lie to England? Brackets.
All they will do is run it through their best possible models.
Well, that's what you'd think, isn't it?
And let's not forget, this has never actually happened before. When people say the negotiations should have been better, it's a bit like being the first country ever to build an underground system.
Yes.
100 years later, you would never do it in the same way.
No,
we are trying to divorce ourselves from something that we've been in for 45 years. If and when the next country decides they're going to do it, they'll do it in a completely different way.
Well, maybe they will. Have you seen the numbers in Poland for Remain versus Leave?
I believe it was about 84% in favour of staying there, wasn't it?
I've got the best callers. I really do. Knowledge, you see. Or, of course, you can find stuff about the New World Order on the internet. I mentioned Poland because that was going to be one of the dominoes that fell after we voted to leave. Remember, it was all going to fall like dominoes. 27 minutes after 11. Why would the Bank of England lie to England? Glenn is in Sidcup. Glenn, why would the Bank of England lie to England?
I haven't got an answer for that. I'm sorry.
But you think they are lying?
No.
Oh, okay.
He's not lying at all. In fact, I wanted to sort of ground the argument a bit more. That I watched the whole presentation yesterday, and over he stressed that these were scenarios and very extreme scenarios. And the punchline, which I haven't really seen mentioned at all, his punchline is, the Bank of England will be there for you.
Yes.
We have... we have really... He also used the phrase mechanical extrapolations.
Did he? He deserves a round of applause for that alone.
Which, now, please be gentle with me.
Go on.
As far as I take from that is that, say, the FTSE rose 1% today.
Yes.
You could then say, well, if it carries on like that, in 100 days' time, it will have gone up by 100%.
That seems feasible to me.
Well, but that's a mechanical extrapolation.
Yes.
Obviously, that wouldn't happen. Something else would drive it down, and it would bobble along, and So he used that phrase quite a few times, and that's where you end up with quite an extreme scenario.
I think. I think coming out with no deal at all.
Yeah.
Is an extreme scenario already, and then you extrapolate from what you know would happen in that event, and then you posit your conclusions about what would happen, which is how you end up warning that Britain will be plunged into its deepest recession since the 1930s.
The figures, you could arm wrestle over the actual figures, whether your house price goes down 30%,
for sure, 20%, 10%. That's not the point, is it?
But what he's saying, and one thing he did say, and I can't remember exactly,
right.
But not only have they capitalised for it, but they've over-capitalised. It's like as though.
But this is the most fascinating thing about the whole Mark Carney Bank of England related saga. He describes problems that we are inflicting upon ourselves, and then explains he is tasked with solving those problems. He is tasked with mitigating the negative impacts that he's already described. So this is why I really salute the man, because he must be he must be devoid of ego, mustn't he? Because his job is to make his own predictions not come true.
Yes, exactly. You and I are both waiting for the grown-ups to turn up.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Now, I think you should start a grown-up board.
Well, I'm the last person who can do that, mate. I just bought new trainers.
Literally like a magnetic board. Mark Carney at the top, and then...
who else?
Pardon?
Who else is going to be on it?
I don't know. Alistair Campbell, I don't know.
Controversial. I'll put you on it.
No.
Kieran the van driver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bryce Barshuk, the Reuters guy, and some of the Brussels correspondents. John Shirley with the haulage company in Dover, who doesn't know as much about running haulage companies in Dover as Andrew Bridgen does.
The problem is, all these people, A, have got something better to do,
yes,
and
exactly.
are relatively moderate. And it's very, they're not explosive enough to, as the Rees-Moggs or...
They're speak-your-weight machines. They're not roller coasters or ghost trains.
Yeah.
Are they? Oh, Glenn, it's all so straightforward when you explain it like that.
It is.
Why can't we put Glenn in charge?
Then you slap your forehead and go, no one else can see it.
It's a living. It's a living, Glenn. I can see it, mate. I've written a book about it. I think I've just worked out where some of the personal animus directed at Mark Carney comes from. One of the reasons why he is widely regarded... look, banking isn't a field of expertise for me, so I can't say universally, but he's certainly widely regarded as one of the few central bankers who had... who presided over his country not falling foul of the global financial crisis in 2008. And some people it's a question of how much credit you lay at his feet and how much credit for Canada being better insulated from that crisis than other countries you put down to the fact that they've got strong regulations. I'd tie the two together. Mark Carney, as a central banker, is in favour of strong regulations. So the two, hand in hand, protected Canada from the impacts that saw, as our previous Canadian caller pointed out, outfits like RBS need to be bailed out by the government, and banks like Barings, of course, go under completely. And that would explain why the ERG and the shady, the politicians that are sponsored by those shady right-wing lobby groups masquerading as think tanks and educational charities, why would they personally have a problem with Mark Carney? Answer, he's a big fan of banking regulation. What do they hate? Anything that puts limits on how much they can exploit for profit. Anything like bad regulation means you can lend money in American subprime mortgage crisis, lending money to people who you know won't be able to afford to pay it back. At some point, the pips will start squeaking, a tiny rise in interest rates, but you persuade them to borrow all the money because you get paid when that deal is signed. And then the debt gets packaged up and sold to someone else, and packaged up again in a fancy way and sold to someone else and sold to someone else, until eventually someone is left holding the baby. When the tide goes out, to mix my metaphors, the more regulation you have, the harder it is to do that. The more regulation you have, the less legal but dirty money speculators, financiers, and more importantly, unscrupulous investors can make. Have a look at the Western world at the moment, and you have unscrupulous investors sponsoring the resident of the White House and Brexit. They even boast about it. That's what I find so astonishing. They boast about how many millions they made on the night of the vote by betting against the pound. And speaking of the performance of the pound, it's time to run through the greatest hits of Andrea Leadsom, because as I find myself in the rather odd position of warming to the editorial line of the Daily Mail, albeit that they're still... I would wonder whether they're pretending to be in favour of Theresa May's deal as a precursor to a massive outbreak of honesty. But it's certainly an unrecognisable paper from 6 months ago. And they, on their front page, have the revelation that Andrea Leadsom, despite casting herself as a key Brexiter, is actually now fully behind Theresa May's deal. I thought it would be a timely moment to have a look at some of her other timeless interventions into public life. This is probably my favourite.
I'm going to nail my colours to the mast here. I don't think the UK should leave the EU. I think it would be a disaster for our economy, and it would lead to a decade of economic and political uncertainty at a time when the tectonic plates of global success are moving. Like the rise and fall of the Roman and Greek empires, we are seeing the rise of the Asian and South American economies at a time when our own future is less certain.
Hey, everyone's allowed to change their mind. Oh, no, except the whole country, of course. No people's vote. And speaking of, as we are speaking today about economic forecasts, I thought we'd sort of remind ourselves, which one are we going to do next? I've got, try this one on for size, Andrea.
Already, we can see that the forecasts of a disaster for sterling, for equities and for interest rates have not been proven correct. The pound is weaker, partly as a result of the markets being wrong on the result of the referendum, and partly on the expectation of further interest rate easing. But lower sterling is good for exports, and it makes inward investment more attractive. It means we may import less and buy more at home. All good things for our economy. When we come to see the post-EU figures, I expect to see continued growth. I expect to see people buying goods, going about their normal business, buying their homes, and yes, enjoying a pay rise.
Gosh, well, I suppose we're all allowed to be wrong. I like this one as well.
If we don't leave and take back control this Thursday, we will have a £10 billion a year independence dividend that we will be able to spend on our priorities.
Just can't make it up, can you? But that's, of course, my problem, not hers, because of this.
Of course, it's very early days, but it would be helpful.
It
would be helpful
and these
if
crucial
broadcasters were willing to be a bit patriotic. The country took a decision. This government is determined to deliver on that decision.
Are you accusing me of being unpatriotic for questioning how negotiations are going, questioning whether you have the position of strength that she said she wanted?
The inimitable Emily Maitlis there, pointing out that Andrea Leadsom was essentially accusing journalists of being patriotic for asking questions that politicians can't answer. And, you know, who else in the space of 5 years hasn't undergone a complete reversal of their original position and started accusing people who criticise them of not being patriotic? Emily Maitlis also has impeccable taste in books. It's 11:43. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Ryan is in Leicester. Why would the Bank of England lie to England, Ryan?
I don't think it's a case of lying, James. I think that yourself included in this is you're being very blinkered.
Yes.
Now, and I'll back that up, don't worry, because I know that you're going to rip me apart if I don't. Mark Carney in May of 2016 said that a vote to leave may initiate a recession. That didn't happen. He was wrong. He's human. He's allowed to be.
Yes. And there's also what's called rational actors, and again, this is, you know, we can keep it sweet. The analysis that he provided presumed that we would act rationally, so we would curb our spending because of the difficult economic circumstances ahead. Thankfully, we didn't, but the pound did go down, and growth has been decimated, just not quite enough to qualify technically as a recession. And of course, as you pointed out yourself, he didn't say would, he said could.
Yeah.
And then on the morning after the referendum result, he personally instigated policies and incredibly high levels of spending specifically designed to make his own prediction not come true, Ryan, as you know.
Okay, and what's to say that won't happen again?
Well, hopefully it will. Hopefully it will. Hopefully he will, which is why the question becomes, why would he not tell the truth to the country of which he is the central banker?
It's hard to say truth and lie because no one can speak with any absolute authority on this. It's never happened.
People who subscribe to the idea that it's project hysteria are clearly suggesting that he's acting in bad faith. So my question today is, why would the Bank of England act in bad faith towards England?
He wouldn't. I don't think that he's got any intentions to mislead anyone. I don't think that's the case. All I'm putting to you is there any chance that he can be wrong?
Oh, of course
he's been wrong before.
Absolutely, but we're more addressing the Rees-Mogg school of thought that is accusing him of being foreign and a failed politician and a second-tier banker, making it very, very personal and accusing him of acting in bad faith. If you're not accusing him of acting in bad faith, there's no beef here, mate.
No, you're right, there's not.
So we're back to the weather. We're back to the weather forecaster analogy. No weather forecaster is infallible, but if it rains on Sunday after the best weather forecaster in the country said it wasn't going to rain, are you never going to trust him again?
That's it, and we're assuming from this that the EU is going to carry on and maintain its status quo. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years?
Okay.
If anyone else is going to leave, and then we might even be in a better position for jumping ship early.
Yeah.
All of this is speculation. I just think that you're having a very blinkered view on the Remain side.
Okay. Because I'm not entertaining the possibility of other countries wanting to leave the European Union and things being good for us because we got out sooner.
Over the last 4 years, James, the political mainstream has gone all over the place. I think it'd be naive to not consider all possibilities and to only think
but we're in complete agreement. We're complete agreement with each other. I mean, you're absolutely right. We have to consider all possibilities. And when you're looking for guidance on what possibilities are more or less likely, then historically we turn to qualified experts, be they academics or central bankers. Or you turn to sort of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Andrew Bridgen and Nigel Farage. And that is, in my view, not being blinkered. It's not trusting idiots.
Well, we trusted idiots when we voted Brexit, didn't we, apparently?
Yeah,
and we didn't end up in a recession.
You're telling me, right, so you think it's going well? You're pleased with the deal?
No, that's a completely different question.
But you won't get over it. It's not. That was the only deal that was feasible once freedom of movement became weaponised, as you know. And you voted for it.
Yeah. No, I didn't vote for how it's turned out.
It couldn't have turned out any differently, Ryan. Never could have done, as I've been telling you for 2.5 years. This has been inevitable since the minute Article 50 was prematurely triggered and the red lines collided with the Good Friday Agreement. That's just reading. That's not an opinion. You won, mate. Get over it. Theo will be with us momentarily to bring us up to speed with latest developments in committee with Theresa May. Before that, a rather timely text from Dave, who's in Wimbledon. He just says, to your callers who keep saying that Project Fear didn't happen and that Carney was wrong, he wasn't wrong. He was describing what would happen if we crashed out. This is what I was trying to explain to the last caller about rational actors. But I didn't understand it as well as Dave, so I thought I'd share this because it's really helpful. He wasn't wrong. He was describing what would happen if we crashed out, or more importantly, what would happen if market sentiment genuinely believed we might crash out. What changed almost immediately was that May came in and markets and business were reassured that we would not crash out without a deal. The same is true today with the latest forecasts. Nothing dramatic is happening because the markets don't believe that MPs will allow no deal. I really hope your callers can get their heads around this. I really hope that I can, Dave. I think I have. One more call, then Theo time. Bill is in Bill, hello, mate. How you doing?
Hello, chap. How are you?
Very good.
First thing I want to say to you,
yes.
Thank you for being so kind the last time I spoke to you. It was a bit of a social moron, and I apologise immensely.
Don't stop apologising, Bill. You got a bit emotional because these things are very important, and you kind of realised perhaps the error of your ways, and that's absolutely fine.
I did.
That's absolutely fine. There was a lot of love out there. I don't know how much time you spent on social media, but you became something of a cause célèbre for compassionate, decent people up and down the country, Bill.
Right. I just want to say is that I think one of the major problems we have in this country is that we have been misled by our politicians in terms of Iraq, the Iraq War. And you know what? If someone said to me in 1979 or 1979 that I could have a mobile device, I could go shopping online, buy something at something like at 9 o'clock in the night, and it could be delivered, they probably would have thought I was in the land of the fairies.
Of course, I know you're right. The pace of change has been immense, and some sensibilities struggle to keep up. Go on.
And all I want to say is that we've got a choice in this country. We either employ someone and let him do his job, or we say to him, actually, you're talking nonsense, you're sacked. I believe Mark Carney has a duty of care to advise us what could happen. That is his mandate, that is in his remit. And I think people should just be quiet and let the man get on with his job.
I don't mind other bankers challenging some of the stuff he says, but quite why we'd invite a mewling backbench MP who can't count up to 48 to contradict what the four fellas...
I have to say, the fact that man's taken his money out of the country and gone to Ireland says everything about
he's opened 2 new funds in Ireland. Bill, before you go, my friend Mitch Benn, the comedian, has written a song about you. Can I send it to you?
Yeah, please do.
So give your details to Beth and I'll make sure you get it, OK? Theo Usherwood is here. Bill is the gentleman who things got a bit emotional last time he rang in. And I said to him, and I say it again, it's not your fault that you voted in the way that you did. They spent over 30 years, so much time and energy persuading you to punch yourself in the face, that you should actually be patting yourself on the back for realising, because there's still plenty of people persuaded that punching themselves in the face is a good idea. Theo Usherwood never punches himself in the face. He doesn't have to. What's been happening this morning, Theo?
The liaison committee in Parliament has been meeting. It's like a grand committee of the chairs of each of the select committees have the chance to question the Prime Minister every 6 months. And I've picked out this moment where Theresa May admits that for the first time actually trying to find a deal on frictionless trade, solving the Northern Ireland border problem, is quite far away.
It is still the government's position that we will be negotiating to achieve frictionless trade. What you see in the political declaration, and you'll see it in the language around the ambition for ambitious customs arrangements in the future, is a clear recognition of the need to reduce that friction as much as possible. I think it's still better to reduce it to have frictionless trade. But as I say, there are those in the European Union who have yet to be persuaded of that argument.
Carry on. That was my comment for the day.
The problem is that we need to solve the problem of frictionless trade by the end of December 2020. Otherwise, the backstop comes into place, and we need it for the future agreement.
And once again, I will point out the people who say it's really, really easy to solve are also the people who say we can't possibly be beholden to the backstop.
Yes.
And that is another one of those points where you'd think it would let the light in, wouldn't you? So, well, hang on, if it's that easy to solve, what's the problem with having a backstop in place? Because you've just said it's really easy to solve, and that means we can solve it by them.
They have not persuaded, as the Prime Minister admitted, people in the EU that it can happen, let alone...
Really? They should send Ian Duncan Smith over with his little flowcharts and his overhead projector.
So that's the problem. And then there was this very cringeworthy moment.
Oh.
It was a cringeworthy moment. So if you're operating heavy machinery and you might make a sudden jerk or something, just stop operating the heavy machinery.
Theo's doing comedy.
I'm not doing comedy. I'm just trying to explain that it was awkward.
Was it cringeworthy?
It was awkward when Tom Tugendhat, who's the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, started to try and describe what our relationship with the European Union might look like.
Not sure that a remarriage is perhaps the correct analogy for the relationship that there's going to be in the future. We're going to be very good friends and working closely
friends
together.
With benefits?
Sorry? I missed your quip, I'm sorry.
Friends with benefits, Prime Minister.
But obviously we look, as we go through this process, we will continue to look, as we have been, because as you probably know, we've made some changes over the summer to DEXU, to the relative roles of DEXU in the Cabinet Office. So we have, throughout this process, we look to make sure that we have the right people in the right place.
That was
You're right, that was utterly cringeworthy. And these are the moments where, and everyone lampoons me for this from all sides of the political spectrum, these are the moments where I feel quite sorry for Theresa May, because she had no idea what was going on then, did she? She had no idea what that phrase, which is a slightly icky phrase to use in the context of committee, she had no idea what it meant.
When it's being televised as well.
And then when I find myself feeling sorry for her, do you know what I do?
You don't feel sorry for her?
Well, no, I do find myself feeling sorry for her, but then I remind myself who she hired. So if you were seeking to surround yourself with people who might provide you with a more balanced view of the world or a less blinkered view, you would not hire the Brexit-crazy former head of politics at the BBC and the Brexit-crazy former political editor of the Daily Mail as your key media advisors, and that's what she did, so I don't feel sorry for her anymore.
Talking of television and the former head of politics at the BBC, there's going to be a television debate if Jeremy Corbyn agrees to it, 8 p.m. on Sunday night.
Just the two of them?
Sorry?
Just the two of them?
Jeremy Corbyn hasn't yet agreed. It's quite interesting, this.
A Remainer pretending to be a Leaver and a Leaver pretending to be a Remainer, neither of whom are offering up something that's better than what we've currently got. I can't wait. What's on the other side?
Labour aren't agreeing to it yet because they don't like the fact that it's with the BBC and, of course, Robbie Gibb, who's Director of Communications, because they think it's going to be a stitch-up.
Oh, I see.
So they think that Theresa May is going to try and make it a really technical debate where they can undermine Jeremy Corbyn on his...
No, because they've got a plan written down, and despite the fact that it's flawed and inferior to what we've currently got. Well, so Jeremy Corbyn is saying, well, hang on a minute, I don't want you to actually push me on what I would do in detail. I just want to be able to make empty platitudes.
He wants to make it about the future of the country and what Brexit means for the future of the country.
Believing. Jobs first. A jobs first Brexit. What does that mean? How dare you ask me what that means? You're so biased, the BBC. I'm Jeremy Corbyn. It will be a jobs first Brexit. Don't ask me what that means. Bias.
Race to the bottom, James?
No, I'm not using that phrase today.
No? Well, that's where Jeremy Corbyn wants to take it. And, of course, he'd like to do it with
Who would he allow to do? Who do you think he'd allow to do it?
I think ITV or Sky are where Labour are at the moment.
They would be more amenable to ITV or Sky, would they, than the BBC?
Much more so from what I've been told. Because
and then, look, watch this. Give me a ring now if you think that the BBC is lefty. Oh, boom, lights up like a Christmas tree. And here's the leader of Labour saying he doesn't like the BBC because he thinks they're biased against him.
Yeah, but they don't like the format.
When will the grown-ups come back, Theo? I miss the grown-ups. Who was the last of the grown-ups? Who was the last of them? Mark Carney's a grown-up, but look at what he has to endure just for doing grown-up stuff.
Grown-ups are gone. Bye-bye, grown-ups.
Cheap shoes for peasants. It's 12 noon.